Hey everyone, I saw quite an interesting article that was posted on chess.com recently by Vladimir Kramnik, who was actually using AlphaZero and DeepMind to have a new variant where both sides can't castle. And to experiment in this variant, he used the power of AlphaZero, who self-played in several matches where both sides couldn't castle, and try and come up with new chess theory. And the idea behind this is just to think of some more creativity in chess, and create a new variant where both sides can't castle and just think creatively. So it's basically trying to do what 960 does and come up with new chess theory where people aren't so involved in book moves and theory, and we can just play chess straight at the get-go. What he found actually is that if both sides can't castle, then the win to draw ratio and loss ratio is pretty much similar to if both sides could castle. So that's quite exciting. So it literally has no effect on the actual results of the game. So it's all about strategy. So several of the games were actually drawn, but there was one game where one side did win. So here AlphaZero, no castle, is playing against themselves. And we'll just see what happened. So d4, knight to f6, c4 and e6, knight c3, c5 are all the book moves. And we get into a modern Benoni. And white now played d5, black took, white recaptured, and queen e7 was played, and queen a4 by white. And here AlphaZero, playing black as well, played the move king to d8. So again, both sides can't castle, and black played this very interesting move, just sidestepping the king off the queen diagonal. And I'm guessing black's plan might be to fiend chess to the bishop and follow up with rook to e8 perhaps. AlphaZero, playing white, also played knight to f3, d6 was played, bishop to f4, g6, and white now played the move h4, maybe preparing the move h5, potentially going to drop the bishop back to h2 as well and gang up on this d6 pawn, as traditionally is what white does in these type of positions. So black played bishop g7 and white played rook c1. So it looks as though white is just going to keep the king in the centre at this point and attack on the flanks. This is actually typical AlphaZero style anyway, just launching this h-pawn up the board and trying to create a passed pawn. Black played knight bd7 and white now played knight to b5, attacking this d6 pawn twice, so black's got to do something. Having said that, moving the knight also weakens this d5 pawn. So what happens if black takes? Well, I went through this variation, it gets rather complicated, so just bear with me. Knight takes d5, bishop takes d6, and black plays queen f6 to move away from the bishop. White's best move is to attack the knight, and actually black's best move is to counterattack a6, attacking the knight on b5. And then white is suggested to play knight to g5, so everything is just on pre at the moment. A takes b5, then this queen takes a8, and this variation just gets messy with knight to b6, protecting the bishop and attacking the queen. The queen is forced to move backwards, and black now gets a nice couple of moves in with b4, hitting the queen, queen b3, and now c4, hitting the queen once again, queen c2, and queen takes b2, a trade of queens, and now e4, attacking the knight, bishop c3, king e2 and king d7. So the bishop's attacks on d6 by the king, and the knight's attacked on d5 by the pawn and the rook. But also white can play knight takes f7, and if rook e8, then king f3 to defend the pawn, rook e6, e5 to protect the bishop on d6, king e8, and these are all stockfish moves by the way. Rook takes d5, knight takes d5, and bishop takes c4. So again, this is an absolutely messy computer variation. This would take ages for humans to calculate. So knight b6 attacking the bishop, bishop takes e6, bishop takes e6, knight g5, takes an a2, and knight to e4. So what the hell has just happened? Well, white's won the exchange and has equal pawn material. So a stockfish gives white as having the advantage in this position due to the rook on h1. But still, it's a very messy variation. very complicated. It would take me ages to go through all variations and sub-variations, so I just thought I'd show you that straightforward line. Again, that occurred after knight takes d5. So already AlphaZero is showing the potential of not being able to castle for both sides. It creates some interesting games, at least in this instance. However, black played knight to e8 to protect the pawn on d6, and white played b4 attacking c5, and black played queen e4 attacking the bishop. Check was played by white, f6 to block, and now the bishop retreated back to d2 to defend the b4 pawn, and AlphaZero of black played h6, and we see that now black has this shield wall of pawns on the 6th rank to screen out any white attacks. So again, this is very interesting. You'd never see this in a game if both sides could castle, so it's creating some interesting environments that both sides can play in. So white played queen to a3 to get their queen more centralised, and a6 attacking the knight, and white played e3. The point is that the knight can't be taken because then the queen will take on a8. So black took on b4 with the pawn, and white can't take this pawn because if queen takes b4, queen takes, bishop takes, white will lose a piece due to a takes b5. So after c takes b4 is played, white has to counter-attack with knight takes d6 attacking the queen. So black may be able to take this knight with knight takes d6, but white can actually take on b4 with the bishop attacking the knight on d6. If the knight moves to somewhere like knight to f7, then knight to d4 is incredibly strong. Even though white's just given up a piece, it looks like white's got a really winning attack here. And if knight to b5 attacking the queen, then bishop takes b5 can be played, a takes b5 and queen takes a8. Black does have queen takes b4 though with check. I'm getting to quite an interesting variation if king e2, knight c5 and d6. Again, Stockfish gives white as having the advantage here. I think it's because the pawn is so far pushed up the board. And maybe rook to d1 is coming as well to centralise everything. But it's still, black's still got a very good fighting chance. So in the game, after knight takes d6, black took on a3 and white took on e4. So a trade of queens occurred. Black played f5 attacking the knight, white dropped it back, and then bishop to b2 hitting the rook. And instead of moving it away, actually white counter-attacked again with the move h5. So this is because if bishop takes c1, white will recapture. And after g5, to bypass the h5 pawn, white can take on f5, and if g4, there's knight to d4, and again white will capture a pawn on a3 and has a very nice attack, all for the total of an exchange. So the exchange is very much worth it for white in this type of position. In the game though, black did actually play g5 instead of taking the rook. White captured on f5, and black played knight to b6 to attack the d5 pawn. White played knight to d4, black played knight to f6, so developing off the back rank, attacking the pawn. White played knight to e5 to threaten knight to f7, rook e8's played, knight f7 anyway with check, and black played king to d7. And white finally developed their last piece, bishop to e2, stopping any knight g4s, and black captured on d5. Maybe thinking why black didn't take the rook here, bishop takes c1, but again bishop takes c1 can be played, and if black captures on d5, bishop takes a3 is still a strong move. If knight c3, there's knight takes h6, takes, and again white is the exchange down, but in this position has a really powerful pawn on h5 that's ready to roll up the board. So for instance, in this position, if black tried rook h8, then white can play knight to f5, and has a very solid structure. So just go back to the game, black actually took on d5, and then white took on h6. So white here is actually a pawn up, and has a very nice passed pawn on h5. Black tries to counteract everything with the move b5, possibly trying to fianchetto their bishop. White finally gets the rook off c1 to play rook c2, and black plays bishop to b7, and now white gets on with the plan of trying to promote this pawn with knight to f5. Black played rook c8, and white played the move f3. If black captures the rook on c2, then the knight will recapture, and black might be forced to play rook h8, attacking the pawn. White will probably play h6, and knight c3 from black. Takes, and king f2 looks okay for white. And if king e6, there's check, takes, and king e5, bishop d3. I think you'd favour white in this position, just because of the passed h-pawn. And this bishop on d3 does an incredibly nice job of trying to support this pawn, where probably h7 will come next. So if we go back to the actual game, after f3 was played by white, knight c3 was played by black, and white continued with h6, and black played bishop to d5. So trying to counteract by attacking this a2 weakness. White played knight g7, attacking the rook. The rook went to e5, and then white played bishop to d3, again supporting this h-pawn as it tries to advance up the board. But after bishop takes a2, black wants a queen of their own. They're going to try and promote this a-pawn. So white carries on, h7, and black gives in and takes on h7. Bishop b1 was also a tempting option that black may have played. And it gets rather complicated once again. Look at this bunch of pieces all together here down in the bottom of the board. It's pretty crazy. So white can take on c3. If bishop takes, there's bishop takes b1, bishop takes d4, and the pawn on e3 is pinned. If knight to f5, bishop b6, and white can get a queen. The rook will take, and then b4. So we've got a bit of an issue for white here because of these pawns rolling up the board. But then bishop takes b4, rook b5, bishop takes a3, and rook takes b1. King e2, g4, and rook h6, check and takes. So after the smoke has cleared, again it looks as though white does have the advantage because they've got two connected passed pawns, but black has a passed pawn of their own. It's going to be a very interesting endgame, but you would favour white in this position. So back to the game, h7 was played, and black actually took this off and sacrificed their knight. So takes on h7, the bishop recaptured, and black played rook to c4, threatening to play rook takes d4 because again this e-pawn is pinned. White checked on f5, the king moved to c7, and bishop to d3 was played. The point is that if black takes on d4, white will take on c3 with the rook or the bishop. So this doesn't actually win a piece for black. So rook c5 was played. White played bishop to c1, trying to take on b2 twice. The knight went to a4, and white took on b2. A takes b2 was played, and king d2. The point is that now white's opened their rook up to stop this b1 pawn from promoting, but also sacrificing a piece in the process. So black actually got a knight with check. White captured, the bishop captured, and white played knight to e6 with check. King b6 was played, rook takes c5, knight takes c5, knight takes c5, the king takes, and then the bishop took on b1, and black played rook to e8. So the smoke has cleared for both sides, and the pawn material is equal, but white now has two pieces for the rook, and probably has the favourable endgame. All white has to do is stop the two passed pawns from promoting down the board. So first, white plays g3, black played rook d8, and g4 was played to solidify this side of the board. King b6, and now bishop d3. The point is that black really can't play the move a5, because then bishop takes b5 will be played. Black played rook to g8, bishop f5 was played, rook d8 again, king e2 to get off this open file. Black played a5, and bishop d3 was played. Now this is actually a very interesting play, because if black played the move b4 here, white can play bishop c2, and there's no way for black to promote these pawns anymore. If rook a8, white can play bishop a4, and suddenly white's blockaded these two pawns. Knight b3 could be played, or just leave the knight there with a nice outpost, and this bishop will hoover up any pawns that try to bypass it. So after bishop d3 in the game, black actually played the move a4. This just allows knight takes b5, so white's just won another pawn and increased their chances of winning this endgame. Black played king c5, king d2 was played, rook b8 and king c2, rook e8, king d2 and rook b8. Finally, white has to play the move f4, and after takes, they've got two connected passed pawns, and these are very powerful. So white attacks, but f5, and rook a8 was played to get behind the pawn. I think if rook g8 here, attacking this pawn, then white will probably play bishop e2, or potentially they could even play the move f6. I'm not entirely sure if that works, but bishop e2 is pretty much safe anyway. But rook a8 was played in the game. White plays knight to a3 to blockade this pawn. The rook does indeed go to g8 this time, and the bishop retreats to e2 to defend. And black played king to d4, white played f6, promoting the pawn, king e4 and knight to b5. So play continued, a3, and now f7 attacking the rook. The rook goes to f8, and white's got everything under control in this position. They've got bishop c4 protecting the pawn and stopping this a pawn. Black played king f4, white's jumped up the king, takes, king e4, king g5, and white's got a nice opposition, and they play the move knight to d6 to protect this f7 pawn, and now black played the move a2. So I'm not sure why they just didn't leave it there, but anyway, white captured on a2, the king went to g7, king e6 to defend the pawn, rook a8 attacking the bishop, it moves to d5, the rook goes to a7, the knight screens the rook out, and king f8. So white's got a bit of a job of trying to move the king off the f8 square, but after knight to d8, there's check, knight c6 to block, rook to b6, king d6, rook a6, king d7, and this gets off the 6th rank where the knight was pinned, rook b6 again, and now knight to e5. So after rook f6, king d8, rook f2, bishop c4, and after some manoeuvring, finally black played the move king to g7. I believe this is because a move like knight g6 may be coming in, or knight to d7, and black would have been checked anyway. So king e7, rook f6, bishop a2, rook f5, and white played knight to g6. The point is, if king takes, then white will play bishop to b1 and win the game. So after knight g6, rook f6 was played, and white could have won the game quickly here with the move f8 queen, takes, and would have had to do knight and bishop checkmate, but that should be no problem for alpha 0. However, white continued with the knight h4, and black played rook to f4, and there's a lot of manoeuvring now. But amazingly, in this position, Stockfish has already worked out a mate for white. I'm sure alpha 0 would have worked this out as well. But play continued quickly, bishop d5, king h6, bishop e6, rook takes, f7, king takes, and king g5. So I've been through this game already, and it looks as though alpha 0 doesn't quite know how to do bishop and knight endgames at the moment anyway. Just because we'll play through quickly. The point is, in bishop and knight endgames, you're supposed to get the king into the corner of your coloured bishop. So white should be trying to force black into a white squared corner. So this is okay at the moment though. They've got black on the back rank, and here they should try and squeeze black into the other corner. To be fair, it looks as though alpha 0 is doing this, but maybe the traditional technique is a lot quicker. But eventually, after several bishop moves and some tempos later, so here they finally forced black into the corner. And after king c7, this is just easy now, king a8, bishop c4, king a7, knight c8 check, the king's forced to one square, and then bishop d5, alpha 0 checkmates alpha 0 in a no castle match. So altogether that was a 124 move game, but it did have some very interesting ideas, especially in the opening, and yeah, this is a good way just to sidestep theory. But anyway, I'll post the link to the article in the description below so you can check that out. It's very interesting. I would recommend you have a look at it. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this analysis and hopefully see you in my next video. Thanks for now.